and who I can match up with the best and who I want to match up with the best. And that's respect to the former champ. That's Derek Lunsford. Obviously we're similar in height. And we have, certain shots I think will match up very well together. But I think there's a lot of shots that I can take from him. I think honestly, I think the front double, the front lat spread, the side shots, the back shots, I think he's very, very tough. He's probably top 3 backs all time, but I think the back lat spread will be very close.
When you go shot for shot, like I've done in all the 8 mandatory poses between you and Derek, again, emphasizing, assuming the conditioning is there and the back is brought up, you win shots. So if all things work out the way that I think they may, that's why I have you in third. Samson, Andrew, because it's Andrew Jack, and I really think that you have the chance to beat Derek, and a lot of people think that I am insane for that.
Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding, and welcome back to episode 2 of my Road to the Arnold Classic series. This video was actually a late addition into the lineup of videos, but one I'm very happy to do. Recently, I was talking with my good friend EP09 Bodybuilding, aka Kinson. Poor Kinson, where do you even begin? We were talking about the Arnold Classic and Arnold Classic predictions, and currently he has Carlos Thomas Jr. in third. Now those aren't his final predictions, he hasn't made those yet, but that's what he was feeling per our convo last week. And honestly, he's not the only one saying foolish things like that. Carlos is probably the most hyped guy going into the show. We haven't seen him in well over a year, and he's a freaky bodybuilder with great proportions too. He's an unknown quantity, and he's a likable guy, on top of having a crazy physique, and he's talking a big game as well. However, Kinson's prediction of third is one of the most ridiculous things I've heard. I guess it's not even just the placing. I guess Carlos could technically place third, but the thing is, he has Carlos ahead of Derek. Yes, Derek is in fourth in Kinson's current soft predictions. You guys know how much I like being right, especially when it's proving my point against Kinson of all people. So let's go ahead and run this little experiment here to test his hypothesis. Now obviously this isn't going to be super fair to Carlos. He's had well over a year to improve and did have some noticeable gaps to fill in. Not to mention, he's only ever been on one pro stage. So here's what I'm going to do. In our conversation, I said 2024 Derek would easily beat Carlos. It wouldn't even be close. But let's make it a little easier for Carlos today. Let's use Derek's 2023 Mr. Olympia version in this contest. We'll be using Carlos's 2023 Texas Pro version, so let's go ahead and use the 2023 version for Derek as well. Can Carlos even defeat that version of Derek? Is Carlos really going to be the next big thing? Or will Kinson be proven wrong yet again? Let's jump into today's video to find out. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. We're jumping into the front double first and foremost. You're going to notice 2 things immediately. The first being Carlos's insane proportions. The potential on this shot alone is off the charts. It's already great. But the second thing you're going to notice is the drastic conditioning difference between him and Derek. As cartoon-like as Carlos's proportions are, Derek could honestly win this on a superior quality alone. Now Carlos is bigger in the legs, and with the better legs he has the better upper-lower balance, but even Derek down here is more cut and has the thinner skin. And up top, Derek has that comic book-like shape as well. And with that said, he does easily win the pose. He can play the freak factor game up top with Carlos. They aren't even really that freaky because of size, it's more so the actual proportions of them. But Derek's vacuum is even deeper. He has the sharper abs by far, the more exaggerated taper, and better overall conditioning upstairs. Carlos does take a win in the arms, however. He actually does have really good arms, but just having a little more size in the legs and arms doesn't sway the pose too much. Like I said, Derek schools him conditioning-wise and has an even more exaggerated upper body shape. When Kinson and I discussed the poses Carlos would win, this is among the ones that Kinson actually listed. Well, I have to disagree fairly strongly on that. But I'll make it a little more narrow on the scorecard just for you, Kinson. And also, Carlos's pose is very solid, of course. On my scorecard, I label margins for poses. A winner of the pose can get 1, 2, or 3 points for a narrow, solid, or dominant win, respectively. My personal reaction to this one is a 2-pointer. I think that's fairly objective, but I'll make it more narrow than it perhaps should be. So let's just give 1 point to brother Derek here in the front double. Now we have the front lat spread, and this is one pose I actually conceded to Kinson in our conversation. Looking at it now though, it's still pretty close. I'd give Carlos the legs, but not really by an insane margin though, which is surprising. But because he wins the legs, he does have the better upper lower body balance once again. In the midsection, I'd go with Derek, as Carlos's abs are basically non-existent. Carlos does win in the chest though, because Derek is pretty flat and soft looking. But both guys are pretty solid and pretty evenly matched in the upper limbs. That leaves us with the lats. You technically get a little more lat visibility from Carlos, but Derek is definitely wider than Carlos, so it's a bit weird. I really could see this one going either way, so I just asked myself who was the weaker one in this shot, and honestly, I think it's Derek. So Carlos is going to end up taking a small win in the front lat spread, just a 1-pointer. Now we're moving to the first side shot, and this is where Carlos could potentially gain some ground thanks to his stockiness and all that mass. And you know, he does have a lot of mass. It's impressive considering this was his pro debut, but he lacks one thing and lacks it by quite a margin, that being detail. Take the side leg for example. Now that Big Rami's out of the picture, Carlos could actually have the best side leg in the world. Look at that hamstring drop alone, it's crazy. But his entire leg is just way too smooth. It looks especially dull next to Derek. If Carlos just had 10% better conditioning, I'd give him the lower half here and probably in every other pose in a heartbeat. But here, I can't. I'm a conditioning guy at heart, and sure, it's close because it's a size versus detail thing, but I think Derek is big and complete enough to take the lower half when you add in the conditioning factor. He makes Carlos look like he's in the off season down here. Moving up, I am giving Carlos small wins in the arm and delt. He's a little more separated here, and the upper limb just pops more than Derek's. That brings us to the chest, and they're pretty close. I'd really need to see these two physiques on stage, but based on what I can see here, Carlos looks just a bit bigger, and he has the better shaped pecs genetically. So overall, like in the side leg, this whole pose is a size versus detail thing. I think it's close either way. I'd be giving out a 1 point on either side of the aisle. I do think Derek is probably the more objective choice because up top he's not that much smaller than Carlos, and Derek won the lower body on conditioning, so I think he has the best combination. But it's a coin toss here, so I can't really make a conclusive call. So when in doubt, I'm going to give it to Carlos. It's one of his stronger poses, so why not? He has more than a fair argument to win here anyway. And we're heading to the back poses, and this is Carlos's weakest area, so I'm fine with giving him a little reprieve here. Now we have the rear double, and alright, this is something, moving on. And yeah, it's the same here. I'm not going to spend time on these poses. They're 3-pointers for Derek. I guess you could maybe make the argument that this pose here could be 2 points because at least Carlos has a little width here. But even in this pose, Derek is wider, his back is thicker, it's more detailed, and the lower body conditioning is light years ahead of Carlos. In the rear double, Derek made him look like he was still an amateur, unfortunately. Derek still made him look like an amateur. Honestly, I think the good thing in all this is that this is actually a good starting point. If I saw that these were my back poses and some twerp on the internet was making fun of me, I'd be fired up to train as much as I could just to grow my back and show a stark difference when I did come back to the stage. I think Carlos could absolutely make a drastic transformation here. There's only one way to go from here actually, and that's up. But right now, even against 2023 Derek, which is still one of the best backs ever, Carlos is obviously not up to the task. But to be fair, no one else in this current era is. The jury is out on our last side pose. This is the only good pic I can find of Carlos, and it's taken from the full call-out photos. It's just not a good photo. Even with that handicap, Derek does make it hard to not want to pick Carlos though. I thought Derek's side try was by far one of his weakest poses from the 2023 Mr. Olympia. Well, half of them were actually pretty bad, but I digress. He does win the side leg again. He's also bigger than Carlos and wider, and they really have about the same size tricep. Derek is a little more separated though. So yeah, it's close until you consider Derek's entire torso with those soggy, saggy pecs and that strange doughiness to his abdomen. Carlos isn't even the strongest in the torso either. He wins, make no mistake about it. The skin on his pecs is tight, and sure, he doesn't have much in the way of abs, but at least the waistline is a little more locked in. And it's not actively bad like Derek's midsection. I'm going to go ahead and throw Carlos another bone here. It's just a point since it's close and Derek wins outside of his unfortunate waterlogged torso, but this also is not conclusive since Carlos was hurt by his photo here. Like some of the other poses, when in doubt, which I am here, I'm going to give it to Carlos. Kinson will appreciate it, I'm sure. Now, here is something incredibly surprising. You probably all know I hate Derek's abs and thighs pose universally, but it was especially bad at the 2023 Mr. Olympia. I complained for the whole year last year about how he did not deserve to win the Mr. Olympia because of this particular pose. However, he is winning here. easily. Without even counting his vacuum, Carlos just has really poor ab genetics. And then add his subpar condition in there and he has subpar separation and depth to them as well. The thighs portion of the pose is fine, I guess, but I'd really like to see those quads a lot more detailed. But I would say the exact same thing about Derek. He actually looks pretty big here, but now he lacks detail. Now as for Derek's abs, well, the entire upper half is very blocky. He has poor taper and a pretty wide waist. But the actual abs themselves do beat Carlos's, as awkward and weird as Derek's are. And technically he has a vacuum pose to offer, but I don't really include it when talking about this pose in regards to 2023 Derek. In my mind, I'm only counting the vacuum if the actual shot was hit first, and at this show, Derek hit the crunched abs pose for maybe a total of 2 seconds. We're lucky there are even pictures of it, really. So unfortunately for Derek, he can't get extra credit for the vacuum here, but just keep it in mind. Other than that though, he doesn't need it. It really isn't a contest. I'm forced to make it a big win for Derek. I won't do 3 points. I think Derek's pose in and of itself is so bad, he locks himself out of a perfect score. But if he had the vacuum to include as extra credit, I would absolutely make this 3 points. But here and now, I'm just going to make it 2 points, believe it or not. Not only did I hate Derek's 2023 abs and thighs pose, I hated his most muscular too. So keep that in mind when I say, once again, there is a sizable gap here. That's the whole thing with this matchup. There seems to just be a very large gap between these two. But after all, we're comparing a Mr. Olympia to someone who was an amateur a year prior to the showing we're using. But anyway, Derek wins in the legs. I have no idea why, but with every version of Derek, his legs looked really big in the most muscular and struggle in all the other poses. And we already know Derek had the detail advantage on Carlos, so now that he's appearing bigger, he actually wins the legs over Carlos in the shot. The midsection is kind of a wash. Derek does have the better abs genetically though. Now the chest and delts are usually where Derek finds himself in trouble because of his notorious lack of detail. Well, honestly, he's not missing that much detail compared to Carlos, if any at all. And Derek is a lot thicker in the chest and has more round, capped off delts. And in regards to the arms, for all intents and purposes, this is another tie. So Derek pretty much sweeps the upper half and somehow also won the lower half. And he's not just winning more body parts. He's wider and more muscular looking overall, and of course more detailed. I think this could absolutely be an insane shot for Carlos with some minor tweaks, but right now he really isn't winning anything against brother Derek. Carlos brings a fantastic pose already, which keeps Derek out of a 3-point margin territory, but this is still a solid win. Solid enough for 2 points. Next, we have the second round of judging, which are the overall physique categories. Now we're looking at the physiques in totality on 4 metrics: flaws, conditioning, muscularity, and shape. Let's go ahead and start with shape. It's simple here. Both guys are very well proportioned and they're pretty much even enough for a tie. Carlos is a bit more balanced top to bottom, but Derek has the better, more exaggerated upper half shape. Next, we have muscularity. This one is going to go to Derek with 2 points. I look at 3 things here in the muscularity category: pound for pound muscularity, overall muscle, and then completeness. Derek's solid margin really isn't even just coming from the amount of muscle per se. It's more so the completeness and Carlos's gaps. Now that doesn't mean Derek isn't bigger than Carlos, because I think he definitely is overall. Carlos only looked bigger in the side chest, and even that was kind of close. Everywhere else, Derek was larger. But then when you add Carlos's massive gap in the back poses, it really brings him down here. I think Carlos is maybe more muscular pound for pound. He's stocky, compact, kind of like William Bonac with better shape. But Derek is bigger overall, meaning he carries more mass in general, and he's more complete, so I think 2 points is pretty fair. And that brings us to flaws, and I'm going to cut it short here. I've complained about 2023 Derek's flaws, the abs, the doughy torso, and so on, for the entirety of 2024. We're past that now. We've had a whole other Olympia since Derek won, undeservingly in my opinion, so I'll just leave it at this. Outside of things in other categories, I can't really make nitpicks on Carlos except for maybe being a little narrow, but that's it. Derek has a few more gripes from me. So Carlos is going to win this category for a change and receive a 1-point win. And finally, in terms of condition, this is kind of a no-brainer. Derek does have some very soft spots like the midsection and the chest at times, especially that 2023 version. So no, he won't be getting a perfect score, but if you look at the vast majority of areas, he was definitely in way better condition than Carlos. Carlos was kind of watery and had a thicker skin overall, and although Derek had places where he kind of fell off a lot, he had places that he schooled Carlos in, like in the side leg, the back, the glutes, the hamstrings. These were places that were a 4-point win for Derek. But when you average it all together, including those soft spots, I'm giving Derek another 2-point win here. Alright, that didn't seem like the closest comparison, and yeah, it wasn't. Kinson thinking that Carlos can be third and beat Derek is, well,
I think he's smoking crack and he ain't in his right mind.
Again, it's not just Kinson though. You have guys like Fuad and even Carlos saying the same thing. But based on what I saw today, I just don't think it's possible at this point in time. Winning this comparison with 79.1 points was Derek Lunsford, with Carlos only scoring 20.9 points. Keep in mind, this is 2023 Derek, and that easily beats Carlos. You'd think this would be obvious, but I guess not. And 2024 would have been a bloodbath. I actually had this comparison set up with the 2024 version of Derek versus Carlos at the beginning. So I went ahead and made a mock scorecard as well, and that would have looked like this. Carlos would win 2 poses, the front lat spread because Derek sucks, and maybe the side tricep, but the jury is still out on that one. 2024 Derek was way improved, and that's probably closer to what we'll see on the Arnold Classic stage, obviously. But even if Derek somehow regressed a full year, Carlos still has to improve a ton just to get close. But I know what Kenson is going to say. Carlos has had time to improve, and he's going to be improved. I agree, but let's talk about what he needs to do or needs to have done. He needs to be bigger overall, and he'll need a lot of size to stand next to Samson and Andrew as well, because Carlos is a shorter guy. He's also going to need a massive back transformation. I don't think backs are built in year-to-year periods. It takes a long time and muscle maturity kicking in to really build a good back, especially from Carlos' starting point. At minimum, he needs to make sure he's not getting blown out of the water in the back poses, which, keep in mind, almost no one can do against Derek at this point in time. Nick Walker can do it, maybe Martin Fitzwater, but other than that, everyone else is getting blown off the map. And Carlos is already starting at a huge deficit. And finally, Carlos is really going to need to up his conditioning game. I think this is the easiest thing for him to do, and something that could really help him with the tools that he already has. With all of those things, he might be able to put up a fight against Derek. Even then, it's probably not going to be enough to beat him, I'll just say it. Let's put a little respect on Derek here, guys. Even if he's off and much smaller than he is now, I think he's easily going to beat all but 1 or 2 guys in this lineup. Anyway, Carlos needs a lot, and I mean absolutely no hate to him. He's only done a single pro show. That's why I'm just asking if we can pump the brakes on this kind of talk. We don't need to be going around saying he's going to be top 3 at this particular Arnold Classic. I hate when guys get so hyped up that they inevitably can't live up to that hype in future shows, and they're just forced into irrelevancy by the fans no matter what they bring from that point on. Carlos has a lot of potential, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, it is largely just potential. He's yet to be proven. I'm very excited to see him, and honestly, with all this said, there is certainly a chance that he could place top 5, maybe even 4th, but he will have to be able to pull off a stunning transformation, and he'll need to beat former Mr. Olympias and Arnold Classic champions. What are the chances that he can put all those things together? I wouldn't say too incredibly high. And as for you, Kenson, consider your claim thoroughly debunked. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. Where do you see Carlos placing at this year's Arnold Classic? Do you think he could be that dark horse and take 4th? Or do you have him somewhere else in the mix? Leave me your thoughts down in the comments. And if you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more. And if you want to support the channel even further and get your hands on some high quality supplements, you have to check out Arms Race Nutrition. Then at the checkout page, use my code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexia.